The millionaire's cruel chess joke aimed at a black maid's son would soon crumble into dust before the city's elite. What began as public humiliation transformed into a masterclass when the quiet child revealed a brilliant mind that no one had bothered to notice. The wealthy man's laughter died in his throat as the boy's small fingers moved across the board with the precision of a grandmaster, teaching everyone present a lesson in humility they would never forget. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The glass walls of a Bel Air mansion shimmered under the California evening sun, casting prismatic reflections across manicured lawns that stretched toward infinity. Inside, crystal glasses clinked and laughter bubbled among guests draped in designer silks and wrapped in an almost tangible cloak of arrogance. Evelyn Harrington stood at the center of her carefully curated universe, her 45 years hidden beneath expert cosmetic work and her family's old money, lending her the confidence to believe she truly was the queen of Los Angeles high society. Tonight's soiree was ostensibly a charity fundraiser, though the actual charitable giving seemed secondary to the social posturing happening in every corner of her $12 million home. In the kitchen and dining area, moving almost invisibly between the wealthy patrons, was Maria Oliveira and her 17-year-old son, Rafael. They had been working for the Harrington household for nearly 5 years, Maria managing the cleaning staff and Rafael helping on weekends and special events like tonight. Rafael moved efficiently between tables, collecting half-empty champagne flutes and barely touched hors d'oeuvres, his eyes downcast as he'd learned was expected. He'd overheard snippets of conversation about stock portfolios, vacation homes in Santorini, and someone's recent divorce settlement that apparently included a private island. None of it was meant for his ears. "Rafael!" The voice sliced through the ambient chatter, causing several conversations to halt. Evelyn Harrington was standing beside an antique chess table, her 4th glass of champagne making her smile looser than usual. "Come here a moment, would you?" Raphael approached cautiously, tray still in hand. Evelyn's friends, 3 men in bespoke suits and 2 women with identical blonde highlights, watched with amused interest. "Care for a game of chess, Raphael? Show us how you play in your neighborhood." The suggestion was followed by tittering laughter that rippled through her small audience. One of the men raised an eyebrow, smirking as if Evelyn had just told the most delicious joke. Raphael stood frozen, the weight of their stares heavier than the tray in his hands. He recognized the trap: either refuse and appear intimidated, or accept and risk humiliation. The laughter that followed Evelyn's invitation was sharp, slicing through the air as deliberately as her painted smile. What Evelyn and her friends couldn't possibly know was that behind Raphael's quiet demeanor and second-hand clothes lay a mind that had been captivating chess masters since he was 7 years old. A mind that had been solving complex mathematical equations while his classmates struggled with basic algebra. A mind that was now calculating his next move in a game that had nothing to do with the chess pieces Evelyn was mockingly arranging on the board. Maria Oliveira froze mid-step, her hand tightening around the silver tray of crystal champagne flutes she'd been carrying. The expensive glasses clinked softly against each other, threatening to topple. For 20 years she had worked in this mansion, cleaning its marble floors, polishing its silver, and watching as her employer Evelyn Blackwood's once genuine kindness had hardened into something cold and entitled. The woman who had once asked about Maria's family with real interest now used them as props for her entertainment. "Raphael, darling," Evelyn called again, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Don't be shy. Show us what you can do." The gathered guests, all wealthy friends of the Blackwoods, tittered with anticipation. Maria caught the exchanged glances, the raised eyebrows, the barely concealed smirks. They were expecting a show, but not the kind that would honor her son. Maria wanted to intervene, to protect Raphael from becoming the evening's amusement, but her position didn't allow for such boldness. She needed this job. The medical benefits covered Raphael's asthma medication, and the salary, though modest, paid for their small apartment and his school supplies. She caught her son's eye across the room, trying to communicate a silent apology. Raphael met Evelyn's gaze, his deep brown eyes betraying nothing of the emotions Maria knew must be churning inside him. At 15, he was already skilled at hiding his feelings, a defense mechanism developed from years of being the scholarship kid at an elite school. Without a word, he nodded slightly, setting aside the physics textbook he'd brought along while waiting for his mother to finish her shift. The crowd parted as Raphael approached the ornate chess set displayed on a marble pedestal near the fireplace. It was a Renaissance-era piece from Florence that Evelyn boasted about to anyone who would listen, carved ivory and ebony with gold filigree work, reportedly once owned by a Medici. Maria had dusted it weekly for years, always with extra care, knowing its value exceeded her annual salary many times over. "Do you know how the pieces move, boy?" asked Gregory Blackwood, Evelyn's husband, his voice condescending as he gestured to the chair opposite him. The guests settled into a semicircle around them, champagne glasses in hand, ready for what they assumed would be an amusing diversion. The wealthy businessman humoring the maid's son before inevitably crushing him in a game that separated the educated from the common. Evelyn gestured grandly across the mahogany chess table, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she swept her hand toward the ornate pieces. "Let's see if you know which way the knights move, Raphael." Her voice carried just enough volume to ensure all her guests could hear, and they responded with knowing smirks, sipping champagne from crystal flutes. The small crowd of wealthy friends had gathered closer, eager to witness what they assumed would be the boy's humiliation. Some exchanged glances, already preparing anecdotes about the afternoon's entertainment for future dinner parties. But as Raphael took his seat opposite Evelyn, something unexpected happened. The boy's nervous fidgeting ceased entirely. He studied the board with a quiet focus that unsettled a few of the onlookers. There was no hesitation, no confusion in his eyes, only calculation. His small fingers moved with a steady confidence as he arranged the black pieces on his side of the board, lining each one up with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. He placed each pawn exactly in the center of its square, adjusted the bishops to perfect diagonals, and positioned the knights with their noses pointing slightly inward. This meticulous arrangement caught the attention of old Mr. Kaplan, who stood slightly apart from the others. The retired judge had spent 40 years observing people in his courtroom, and he prided himself on his sharp memory for detail. Something about the boy's methodical approach struck him as familiar, reminiscent of championship matches he'd watched in Washington Square Park decades ago. Mr. Kaplan's bushy eyebrows furrowed as he watched Raphael's slender fingers hover momentarily over the knight before placing it with decisive gentleness. The elderly man took a thoughtful sip of his scotch, his eyes narrowing, as Evelyn made her opening move with a flourish that seemed suddenly gauche compared to the boy's quiet intensity. There was something about this child that didn't align with Evelyn's dismissive introduction, and Mr. Kaplan found himself moving closer to the table, suddenly very interested in how this match might unfold. "Why don't you make the first move?" Evelyn purred as she claimed the white pieces. Oblivious to the tradition of drawing lots for color, she swept a pawn forward, announcing "Souffort, King's Pawn Opening. Learned it at Yale, of course." The guests chuckled appreciatively, champagne glasses tinkling as they settled in to watch what they assumed would be a quick, humiliating defeat. Raphael responded immediately with C5, the Sicilian defense. The room's laughter faltered, replaced by a hush as they recognized the move was no accident. Maria watched, her heart pounding, remembering Raphael's years spent huddled over borrowed chess books at the library. The public librarian, Mrs. Gonzalez, had taken a special interest in her son, setting aside chess strategy books whenever they arrived. Interesting choice, Evelyn said, her smile tightening at the corners. She moved another pawn without the same confidence, her eyes now studying Raphael's face with newfound wariness. The boy's expression remained neutral, almost serene, as his fingers hovered over the board with practiced precision. 3 moves later, the atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. What had begun as entertainment at a child's expense had become something else entirely. Several of the men had set down their drinks and moved closer, their expressions shifting from amusement to genuine interest. One of them, an older gentleman with silver hair, whispered something to his companion while pointing subtly at the board. "Check," Raphael said quietly, moving his knight into position. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Evelyn's face flushed crimson. "A lucky move," she muttered, hastily repositioning her king, but her fingers trembled slightly, betraying her growing unease. Maria clutched her serving tray against her chest, fighting the urge to smile. She remembered the countless evenings watching Raphael defeat the computer program on their ancient laptop, how he'd explained complex strategies to her with patient enthusiasm. The boy had taught himself notation, studying famous matches from history until he could recite them move by move. Mr. Richardson had wandered over now, his eyebrows raised as he observed the unexpected competition unfolding in his living room. His gaze shifted between the board, Raphael's calm demeanor, and Evelyn's increasingly flustered movements. For the first time that evening, he seemed to actually see the boy, not as the maid's son, but as someone worthy of genuine attention. "Fascinating," he murmured, as Raphael captured Evelyn's bishop with a move that even Maria could recognize as brilliantly executed. Evelyn's confidence flickered as Raphael captured her knight with a textbook fork maneuver. She pressed her lips into a thin line, glancing at the other guests who were now watching with undisguised interest. "He probably saw that in a movie," she said dismissively, adjusting her pearl necklace with nervous fingers. "Children are good at mimicking what they see." But Judge Harrington, who had been observing silently from behind his whiskey tumbler, leaned toward his wife. "That's not beginner's luck," he whispered, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "That's study. Look at his board awareness." Raphael's hands moved with practiced grace across the polished wooden pieces. Each move was deliberate and confident, his small fingers placing the pieces with a gentle click that seemed to punctuate the growing tension in the room. He wasn't just reacting to Evelyn's increasingly desperate attacks, he was controlling the tempo of the game, setting subtle traps that she stumbled into with alarming frequency. The living room had fallen quiet. Even the staff had paused their duties, watching from the periphery as the board transformed into a battlefield where every piece had a purpose in Raphael's grand design. His face remained calm, occasionally glancing up at Evelyn with those intelligent eyes that betrayed nothing of his strategy. "Check," Raphael said softly, after sliding his bishop diagonally across the board. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she moved her king out of danger. But her escape route was narrowing with each exchange. The confidence that had fueled her earlier mockery was evaporating rapidly, replaced by a dawning realization that was visible on her flushed face. Mr. Wellington watched from his armchair, his expression unreadable except for a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He caught Maria's eye across the room where she stood frozen, a silver tray of appetizers forgotten in her hands. For the first time that evening, something genuine passed between employer and employee, a shared moment of surprise as the social hierarchy of the room quietly rearranged itself around the unexpected talent of a 12-year-old boy from the wrong side of town. Maria thought back to the countless mornings she had found Raphael hunched over that old second-hand laptop she'd bought from a garage sale 3 years ago. The screen's backlight would illuminate his concentrated face in the pre-dawn darkness of their small apartment, his fingers moving chess pieces across digital squares while she prepared for another long day of cleaning other people's homes. She remembered asking him once, as she tied her hair back and gathered her cleaning supplies, "Why do you love this game so much, mijo? Why chess of all things?" Raphael had looked up at her, his young face serious beyond his years. "Because on the board, everyone starts equal, Mama. It doesn't matter who you are outside the game. Here, I can be anything." Those words had stayed with her, lodging in her heart like a precious stone. Now, watching her son seated across from Evelyn, Maria felt a surge of fierce pride. Raphael's face remained perfectly calm, almost expressionless, but Maria recognized the fire burning in his eyes, that quiet, unshakable resolve she'd seen so many times before. His hands moved with practiced precision, each piece placement deliberate and confident. With every move, he was systematically dismantling Evelyn's opening strategy, exposing the shallow understanding beneath her practiced confidence. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. What had begun as amusement was transforming into stunned silence. The self-assured elite who had gathered to witness what they thought would be a humiliating spectacle were now exchanging uncomfortable glances. Some leaned forward in their chairs, suddenly invested in the game's outcome. Others shifted nervously, sensing the unexpected turn of events. A few were already pulling out their phones, discreetly searching Raphael's name online, wondering if they'd somehow missed something important about this unassuming boy in worn jeans and a simple button-up shirt, the son of the woman who cleaned their homes and served their drinks. Raphael's hand hovered over his knight, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. He could see the growing frustration in Evelyn's eyes as she watched him calculate his next move with seemingly little effort. "You're moving too quickly, Raphael," Evelyn snapped, her manicured fingers drumming against the table. "In real chess, you're supposed to think about your moves. This isn't some playground game." Her voice carried that distinctive tone of someone trying to regain control of a situation rapidly slipping away. Raphael nodded solemnly, feigning deep contemplation. He furrowed his brow and placed his finger on his chin, mimicking the pose he'd seen in chess magazines. After an exaggerated 30 seconds of silence, he moved his pawn to c5, a move that appeared harmless but was actually laying groundwork for something far more sophisticated. The judge, who had been watching silently from the side, leaned toward another guest. "He's setting up a Sicilian defense, dragon variation," he whispered, genuine surprise in his voice. "That's an advanced opening strategy. Most grandmasters wouldn't expect it from someone his age." Evelyn overheard the comment and scoffed loudly. But Raphael noticed the subtle shift in her posture. Her shoulders tensed, and she sat up straighter in her chair. The confidence that had radiated from her just minutes ago was beginning to crack. "Lucky move," she muttered, reaching for her queen. Her hand trembled slightly as she repositioned the piece, a premature development that any experienced player would recognize as a mistake. Raphael pretended not to notice her growing unease. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the board, mapping out the next 12 moves in his head. He'd studied this variation for months at the community center, often playing against himself when no opponents were available. The dragon was his favorite, aggressive, complex, and devastatingly effective when executed properly. As Evelyn completed her move, Raphael caught his mother's eye across the room. She stood frozen, cloth in hand, watching the match unfold with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He gave her the smallest of nods, their secret signal that everything was going according to plan. The wealthy spectators might have seen a poor maid's son sitting at that chess table, but Raphael knew what they didn't. In the 64 squares before him, social status meant nothing. Only strategy, calculation, and vision mattered here. The room fell into a hushed silence as the match progressed. It was as if an invisible hand had turned down the volume on the party. Glasses of champagne hovered mid-air, forgotten. Whispered conversations died on lips. Even the string quartet in the corner seemed to play more softly, their melody fading into the background as all eyes fixed on the unlikely chess battle unfolding in their midst. Harrison's expression had transformed from smug confidence to furrowed concentration. His fingers hesitated longer before each move, while Elijah's hands moved with quiet certainty. The boy didn't showboat or rush. He simply played with the focused precision of someone who saw the board not just as 64 squares, but as a universe of possibilities stretching out before him. "Check," Elijah said softly, placing his bishop in a position that threatened Harrison's king while simultaneously protecting his own knight. From her position by the service entrance, Maria watched, one hand pressed against her mouth. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. These weren't tears of anxiety or embarrassment, as she had initially feared. They were tears of fierce, overwhelming pride. For years, she had watched her brilliant son retreat into himself when faced with the dismissive glances and condescension of people who saw only his circumstances, never his capabilities. Now, in this opulent room filled with people who had never truly seen him, Elijah was silently commanding their complete attention. A wealthy woman in a designer dress leaned toward her companion. "Who is that child?" she whispered, not taking her eyes off the game. "The Maid's son," came the reply, but the usual disdain was missing from the voice. Instead, there was something new: respect. Maria caught the exchange and straightened her shoulders. "Yes," she thought, "he is the Maid's son, and he is extraordinary." The thought warmed her from within as she watched her son, calm, focused, and finally being seen for who he truly was. Raphael sacrificed his pawn with a seemingly careless flick of his wrist, the black piece sliding across the board as if it held no value. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd, their champagne glasses momentarily forgotten as they watched the audacious move. Mr. Kaplan, who had been observing silently from the sidelines, nearly choked on his drink, his eyes widening with recognition. "That's a trap," he whispered to the gentleman beside him, his voice barely audible but laden with certainty. "She's walking right into it." Evelyn's ruby-painted lips curled into a smirk as she captured the abandoned pawn. Her perfectly manicured fingers moved with practiced precision, but those who knew chess well could see what she couldn't. The board had transformed into Raphael's playground. "This will be over soon," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her growing uncertainty. Something about the boy's calm demeanor was unsettling her carefully constructed confidence. Raphael remained unmoved by her bravado. His eyes, wise beyond their years, didn't fixate on the board as most players would. Instead, he studied Evelyn's face, the tightening around her eyes, the forced nature of her smile. Then his gaze swept across the room, taking in every guest's shifting expressions, the dawning realization on some faces, the confusion on others, and the barely concealed excitement from those who understood what was unfolding. The atmosphere in the room had changed. What had begun as entertainment, a cruel joke at the expense of a maid's son, was transforming into something else entirely. The wealthy guests who had gathered to witness Raphael's humiliation were now witnessing something unexpected. Some leaned forward, abandoning pretenses of disinterest. Others whispered urgently to their companions, pointing subtly at positions on the board. Mr. Kaplan moved closer, his expert eyes tracking the invisible lines of attack and defense that crisscrossed the chessboard. "The boy's playing at a master level," he murmured to himself. Those aren't random moves. That's a variation of the Sicilian defense I haven't seen executed this cleanly in years." Evelyn's hand hovered uncertainly over her bishop. For the first time that evening, doubt clouded her features. She glanced up at Raphael, perhaps hoping to find some weakness, some childish tell that would reveal his strategy. Instead, she found only patient, calculating eyes that seemed to have already mapped out the next 10 moves. The silence stretched as Evelyn deliberated, the ticking of the ornate grandfather clock in the corner suddenly audible. Raphael waited, his small hands folded neatly in his lap, the picture of composure. The game had transcended mere pieces on a board. It had become a battle of wills, of backgrounds, of expectations shattered like glass against stone. Raphael rose from his seat and crossed the room to where his mother stood. The weight of the moment hung in the air as the spectators watched in confusion. He leaned close to Maria, his voice barely audible to anyone else. "Remember when you said, 'I should never let anyone define my worth,'" he whispered, his eyes reflecting both determination and gratitude. Maria nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. That memory was crystal clear, her voice in his ear on his hardest days. When classmates had mocked his second-hand clothes, or when teachers had underestimated him, she had always been his anchor, his unwavering support, even when the world seemed determined to push him down. "You are worth more than what they see," she had told him countless times. "Your mind is a gift, never let them convince you otherwise." That memory, her wisdom and love, gave him the strength he needed now. Raphael straightened his shoulders and returned to the chessboard with renewed purpose. The room had fallen completely silent, every eye tracking his movements as he settled back into his chair. He studied the board for precisely 7 seconds before making his next move. The piece clicked against the board with quiet finality. Evelyn's sharp intake of breath was audible to everyone. Raphael had unleashed a devastating double threat that even the most casual chess observer could recognize as brilliant. The trap was elegant in its simplicity, yet impossible to escape. If Evelyn defended her king, she would inevitably lose her queen, the most powerful piece on the board. If she chose instead to save her queen, checkmate would follow in precisely 3 moves with no possible defense. The tension in the room soared as the implications became clear. This wasn't just any ordinary chess match anymore. This was the moment when everyone present was forced to reconsider their assumptions about the quiet son of a maid. Evelyn's hand hovered over the board, trembling slightly. For the first time since the game began, genuine uncertainty crossed her face. The confidence that had carried her through decades of business dealings and social climbing seemed to evaporate as she confronted the reality before her. Evelyn stared at the board, the color draining from her face. Her fingers trembled as she reached toward her king, then pulled back as if burned. The crowd that had gathered around their table was utterly silent, all eyes fixed on the impossible position before them. That can't be right," she stammered, scanning desperately for an escape. Her gaze darted from piece to piece, calculating, searching for any move that might save her. The tournament judge leaned over, his expression grave as he studied the board. After a moment, he shook his head. There was none. "Checkmate in 3 moves, regardless of what you play," the judge confirmed quietly. Evelyn's nostrils flared as she looked up at Raphael, who sat calmly across from her. The boy's face remained neutral, though his eyes held a quiet intensity. The whispers began to ripple through the onlookers. How had this unknown boy, this maid's son, dismantled one of the club's strongest players? Did someone coach you?" Evelyn demanded, her tone shrill, fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Who's been teaching you these openings, these tactics?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and desperate. Raphael finally smiled, a patient, knowing smile that seemed to belong to someone far older than 13. "No, ma'am. I taught myself, from every book I could find." "Impossible," she hissed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Nee. The public library has 37 chess books," Raphael continued softly. "I've read them all, some of them 5 or 6 times. He gestured to the board. "This endgame is from Capablanca versus Marshall, 1918. I memorized all their games." Someone in the crowd let out a low whistle. Mr. Harrison stepped forward. Placing a steadying hand on Evelyn's shoulder, she shrugged it off violently. "You're telling me you just read some books?" Her voice cracked slightly. Raphael nodded. "And played against myself every night for years." He paused, then added without malice, "Chess makes sense to me. The rules never change. It's fair." The implication of his words wasn't lost on anyone present. In chess, your background didn't matter, your mother's occupation didn't matter, only your mind and your moves determined the outcome. Evelyn abruptly stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Without another word, she turned and strode away, leaving her fallen king as testament to what had transpired. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Evelyn had always been the undisputed queen of these gatherings, her parties the most lavish, her opinions respected, her social hierarchy unchallenged. But now, as they witnessed her thinly veiled contempt for this young chess prodigy, something changed in the room. The admiration they'd held for her all these years began to curdle like milk left too long in summer heat, revealing the sourness that had perhaps always been there. "I simply think we should verify his abilities," Evelyn said, her voice brittle with forced pleasantness. "After all, anyone can memorize a few opening moves." Maria, who had been standing silently near the wall, as maids were expected to do, stepped forward. The room fell silent. In all the years she had served in this house, none of these wealthy patrons had ever seen her do anything but nod, smile politely, and disappear when no longer needed. But now she stood tall, her shoulders back, her gaze direct. "My son worked for everything you see here today," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "When our electricity was cut off last winter, he studied chess books by candlelight. When our internet was disconnected, he walked 3 miles to the public library every Saturday, rain or snow, to use their computers and read international chess journals." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken sacrifice. A hush fell over the gathering. Even the clink of crystal glasses stopped. Several guests looked down at their expensive shoes, suddenly aware of the privilege they took for granted. One woman discreetly placed her diamond-encrusted watch under her sleeve. "When Carlos was 7, Maria continued, her voice gaining strength, "he beat every chess app on my old phone. By 8E, he was playing against college students online. At 9, he was solving chess puzzles that stumped his online tutors." She paused, looking directly at Evelyn. "My son doesn't need your validation, Mrs. Harrington, but perhaps you need to see what determination looks like when it isn't backed by wealth." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Harrington cleared his throat, looking at his wife with an expression that mixed embarrassment with something else, perhaps a newfound respect for the woman who had cleaned their home for years, whose life story they had never bothered to learn. Raphael moved his queen with quiet precision, sliding the piece across the polished board with a gentle tap. "Checkmate," he announced, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow filling the entire room. Evelyn froze, her manicured hands trembling over her toppled king. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light as her fingers hovered uselessly above the board, as if searching for an escape that simply wasn't there. Around them, silence reigned. No applause, no laughter, only the stunned acceptance of what had just unfolded. The crowd that had gathered to witness what they thought would be a humiliation had instead witnessed something extraordinary. For the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time ever, the guests looked at Raphael with genuine respect. The transformation was palpable, like a wave washing over the room. Wealthy men who had barely acknowledged his existence now studied him with newfound interest. Women who had dismissed him as part of the background now couldn't take their eyes off him. He was no longer invisible, no longer just the maid's son. He was the center of the room, the one who'd shattered their assumptions with quiet brilliance. "I don't understand," Evelyn finally managed, her voice cracking slightly. "How did you—" She stopped herself, Unable to complete the question without admitting her own underestimation, Raphael simply offered a small, humble smile in return. He hadn't played to humiliate her. He'd played because he loved the game, because chess had been his sanctuary when the world seemed determined to put him in his place. The board didn't care about his background or his mother's occupation. It only recognized skill and strategy. Mr. Whitfield stepped forward, breaking the spell of silence. "Young man," he said, extending his hand toward Raphael, "that was remarkable." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Others began to murmur in agreement, the sound building like a gentle tide. Raphael accepted the handshake, feeling a strange mix of pride and discomfort at suddenly being the focus of so much attention. His eyes searched the crowd for his mother, finding her standing near the kitchen doorway, tears of pride glistening in her eyes. This was a setup. "Someone trained you to humiliate me." Evelyn's voice rose to a shrill pitch as her composure finally shattered. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she swept them across the chessboard, sending several pieces tumbling to the floor. The clatter echoed through the vast room, bouncing off marble floors and crystal chandeliers. No child just plays like that, not without coaching, not without someone feeding you moves. Her eyes darted accusingly toward Maria, who stood frozen by the doorway. Raphael slowly rose from his chair, his small frame somehow commanding the room's attention. He met Evelyn's wild gaze with remarkable steadiness for a 12-year-old. "Mrs. Harrington, nobody told me what moves to make. Chess isn't about memorizing, it's about seeing patterns." His voice remained soft but clear. "You invited me to play to make a point, but tonight the lesson wasn't the one you expected." Maria felt her heart swell with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She watched as her son stood there, not gloating, not angry, just calmly stating facts. His humility in victory somehow made Evelyn's loss seem even more profound. "I refuse to believe this," Evelyn muttered, looking around the room as though searching for allies, but finding none. Even her husband stood silent, his expression unreadable. This was meant to be a simple amusement, a little social experiment. Her words hung in the air, their true meaning painfully transparent to everyone present. Charles Harrington cleared his throat. "Evelyn, enough." His voice carried the weight of quiet authority. "The boy won fair and square. Several times, in fact." He approached Raphael and extended his hand. "That was remarkable chess, young man, truly remarkable." Raphael shook the offered hand, his small palm disappearing into Mr. Harrington's grip. "Thank you, sir. My grandfather taught me before he passed. We played every day after school." Maria noticed something shift in the room, a subtle rebalancing of power. The guests who had been watching with amused condescension now regarded Raphael with genuine curiosity. One of the men, a university professor Maria had served drinks to earlier, was studying her son with particular interest. "Where does he go to school?" the professor asked Maria directly, the first time all evening anyone had addressed her as a person rather than staff. Before she could answer, Evelyn cut in, her voice tight. "This evening's entertainment has concluded. I believe it's time for our staff to return to their duties." The judge cleared his throat, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. The tension was palpable as he adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Raphael. "Perhaps it's time we acknowledge real talent when we see it," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "In all my years judging chess competitions, I've rarely witnessed such natural brilliance." One by one, the guests began to murmur in agreement, nodding their heads and casting impressed glances toward the young boy. The same people who had laughed at Raphael's presence were now applauding his skill, their loyalties shifting like weather vanes in the wake of his stunning victory. Evelyn's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson, her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she watched her social circle abandon her. The humiliation was unbearable. She spun around, her designer dress swishing dramatically as she turned on Maria, who stood quietly beside her son. "How dare you let him embarrass me like this?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "This was supposed to be Gregory's moment to shine. You've ruined everything." Her mask of superiority was slipping, revealing the insecurity that had always lurked beneath. But Maria, who had spent years lowering her eyes and accepting Evelyn's condescension, straightened her back and looked her employer directly in the eye. The room fell silent again, witnesses to this unexpected confrontation. "My son doesn't need your approval," Maria said, her voice steady and clear. "He's already proven more in 1 hour than most do in a lifetime." She placed a protective hand on Raphael's shoulder. "Chess isn't about wealth or status. It's about intelligence and strategy. Things you can't buy with all your millions." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others nodded subtly in agreement. The balance of power in the room had shifted irrevocably. Raphael stood tall beside his mother, his expression serene despite the drama unfolding around him. He had come here to play chess, and he had done exactly that, brilliantly and without apology. Raphael stood at the center of a dispersing crowd, accepting congratulations with quiet dignity. The murmurs around him had changed completely, from earlier mockery to genuine admiration and respect. People who had barely acknowledged his existence hours before now wanted to shake his hand, to be associated with the young chess prodigy who had humbled one of the wealthiest men in the city. Maria watched from a few feet away, her heart swelling with emotion as she observed her son's transformation. The shy boy who had entered this mansion with downcast eyes now stood tall, his shoulders squared with newfound confidence. "Excuse me, young man." An older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses approached Raphael. "I'm Dr. Lawrence Whitman, trustee at Westlake University." He extended a business card between 2 fingers. "What you demonstrated today wasn't just chess skill, it was analytical thinking of the highest order. If you're interested in scholarship opportunities, call my office Monday morning. We need minds like yours at our institution." Raphael accepted the card with a polite nod, but when he looked up, Maria saw something she hadn't seen all evening, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, lighting up his entire face. For weeks, his smiles had been perfunctory, mechanical things offered to reassure her that he was fine despite the bullying at school and their financial struggles. This smile was different. It radiated pure joy. Maria felt tears prick her eyes as a wave of emotions crashed over her. Every extra shift she'd taken, every night she'd gone to bed exhausted, every indignity she'd endured cleaning these massive houses, all of it had been worth it for this moment. She had always believed in Raphael's brilliance, had fought to nurture it even when they barely had enough for essentials. Now others could see what she had always known. As Raphael tucked the card carefully into his pocket, their eyes met across the room. In that silent exchange between mother and son was a shared understanding. This was just the beginning. The doors that had seemed permanently closed to them were finally cracking open. And Raphael had the key all along in that remarkable mind of his. Evelyn stood frozen in the center of her once bustling ballroom, watching as guests quietly filtered out. The room that had buzzed with laughter and conversation just hours earlier now echoed with uncomfortable silence and the occasional whisper. Each departing figure took with them a piece of the carefully crafted image she had spent decades building. Her stomach twisted as she caught fragments of hushed conversations. Can you believe she would, and never suspected she could be so? Even Judith and Eleanor, women who had brunched at her table for 15 years, collected their purses without meeting her eyes. When Judith accidentally caught Evelyn's gaze, she quickly looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line of disappointment. The chandelier lights suddenly felt too bright, exposing everything Evelyn had tried to hide beneath her polished veneer. In the grand foyer, Raphael walked alongside his mother, his tournament trophy tucked carefully under one arm. The marble floors that had once intimidated him now simply felt like stone beneath his feet. Maria's face glowed with quiet pride as she slipped her arm around her son's shoulders, drawing him close. "You know," she whispered, her voice meant only for him. "You change more than just a game tonight." Raphael looked up at her, his young face serious in the warm light of the entryway. "I just played chess, Mom." Maria smiled, shaking her head gently. "No, my brilliant boy. You showed everyone that worth isn't determined by bank accounts or last names." She paused as they reached the massive oak doors. "And you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, too." Behind them, they could hear the faint sound of crystal shattering, Evelyn's temper finally breaking through her composure, but outside, the night air felt clean and new. Several guests nodded respectfully to Raphael as they passed, one even asking if he might be interested in joining a chess club at the university. Maria squeezed her son's shoulder as they walked down the long driveway toward the bus stop. For the first time since arriving at the mansion that morning, her spine straightened completely, her head held high. The weight of invisibility had lifted from her shoulders. Under the California stars, Raphael stood on the mansion's terrace, turning the embossed business card between his fingers. The weight of it felt significant, heavier than paper had any right to be. "Rafael Martinez, chess prodigy," it read, followed by contact information for the National Chess Federation's Youth Development Program. This small rectangle of cardstock represented everything that had changed in one evening, a doorway to opportunities he'd barely allowed himself to dream about. "They want me to compete nationally," he told his mother, his voice still carrying traces of disbelief. "Mr. Thornton's friend says I could qualify for a full scholarship to any university in the country if I continue developing my skills." Maria wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders, her work uniform still on, but somehow looking different now. Less like a symbol of servitude and more like the battle armor of a woman who had fought for her child's future. The Thorntons and their guests had looked at Raphael differently by the end of the night. Gone were the condescending smiles, replaced by genuine respect and, in some cases, poorly concealed astonishment. When they arrived home to their small apartment, Maria took the White Queen, the chess piece Raphael had used for his final, devastating move against Mr. Thornton, and placed it in a small wooden frame she normally used for photographs. She hung it on the wall next to their modest family portrait, the contrast between the elegant chess piece and their simple surroundings telling its own story. "Oh, why are you framing it, Mama?" Raphael asked, though he already understood the answer somewhere deep in his heart. "Because some victories need to be remembered," she replied, adjusting the frame until it sat perfectly level. "Not just the victory over Mr. Thornton's chessboard, but the victory of being seen for who you truly are." Raphael nodded, running his fingers over the business card one more time before placing it carefully on his desk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and undoubtedly new obstacles. But something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer just the Maid's son in the eyes of the Thorntons and their wealthy friends. He was Rafael Martinez, a name they would remember, a talent they couldn't ignore, and a future they couldn't predict. Raphael's story spread like wildfire across campus and social media. The boy who had defeated the millionaire at her own game was now a freshman on a full scholarship, his humble beginnings making his achievements all the more remarkable. Students would point him out in hallways, professors took special interest in his academic potential, but Raphael remained grounded. He remembered his mother's sacrifices, the long bus rides, the late nights cleaning other people's homes so he could have opportunities. "Everyone deserves a chance to play the game," Raphael told the small group gathered in the community center. Before him sat 12 children, ages 7 to 14, from the same working-class neighborhoods where he'd grown up. With donated chessboards and pieces, Raphael had founded Knights of the Community, a chess club specifically for kids whose parents couldn't afford expensive after-school programs. Every Saturday, he taught them strategies, opening moves, and the patience that chess required. "My mother opened doors for me," he explained to a local reporter who came to cover the club's first tournament. "Now, I'm just trying to do the same for others." The article featured a photo of Raphael surrounded by beaming children, their fingers poised over chess pieces, concentration etched on their young faces. Across town, Evelyn's world had contracted. The invitations that once filled her social calendar had slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Her so-called friends found excuses to be busy. The charities she had chaired for years sent polite letters thanking her for her service as they removed her from their boards. The video of her humiliation had been viewed millions of times, her name forever associated with that moment of exposed prejudice. In her empty house, Evelyn often found herself staring at the chessboard that remained in her living room. She hadn't put it away, though she couldn't explain why. Sometimes she would set up the pieces, recreating the final positions from that fateful afternoon. The black king standing triumphant, while her white queen lay toppled on its side. She would run her fingers over the smooth pieces, remembering the boy's face as he quietly said, "Checkmate," and feeling again the hollow recognition of her own defeat, not just at chess, but at something far more important. Raphael never wasted time on bitterness. In the years that followed his triumph at the chess club, he often reflected on how that night changed everything. "Chess taught me patience, and that real victory is building something no one can take away," he told a reporter during an interview for a feature on rising stars in the academic world. His calm confidence had become his trademark, inspiring countless underprivileged children who saw in him proof that barriers could be broken. The scholarship had opened doors, but it was Raphael's brilliant mind and unwavering work ethic that carried him through. He graduated with honors, declined Harrington's offer to work at his company, and instead founded an educational technology startup that developed chess-based learning programs for schools in underserved communities. The same people who had once looked down on him now sought his expertise and partnership. Maria had continued working as a housekeeper for several years, but eventually Raphael convinced her to retire. "You've worked enough for both of us," he told her, handing her the keys to their new home, a modest but beautiful house with a garden where she could grow her flowers. She kept a special shelf in the living room displaying Raphael's achievements, his championship trophies, university diploma, and a framed photo of him shaking hands with a Supreme Court justice. Sometimes, when Raphael visited for Sunday dinner, Maria would catch him looking at the old, worn chess set they kept on display, the very same one he'd practiced with as a child. In those moments, she saw not just the successful man he'd become, but also the determined little boy who had studied chess moves by lamplight after finishing his homework. Maria watched her son grow into a man whose worth was measured not by the opinions of the powerful, but by the strength of his character. And in the quiet of their new home, as she prepared his favorite meals and listened to him talk about his latest projects, she knew that one night's humiliation had sparked a legacy that would last for generations. The game that was meant to mock him had instead revealed his brilliance to the world.